Welcome back. Okay, here we go. You know the drill by now. Check the source list, the last side. On the last slide, most of these decks, again, the sources are the same, but always look just in case I added or removed something. Where increasingly, you're going to notice I'm not spending as much time on the Far East. There's just a lot to cover, and I don't want these to last more than 45 minutes. The first couple I realized were very long. They should be shorter. It's not because less is happening, but it's going to be increasingly difficult to get into something in the proper amount of detail to make sense of it. So this is supposed to be an overview anyway. So we're not going to get down into the weeds on a lot of this stuff. And again, dropping out things, China, India, Japan, Korea, we're not going to be able to spend as much time on those going forward. So the 9th century, that would be from 800 to 899 AD. And we begin in the Middle East. So this is the Abbasid Caliph, or Caliph, Harun al-Rashid. This is him on the left, and he is receiving, in this picture, he is receiving a delegation sent by Charlemagne. Okay, so we'll talk about the painting at the end. So one of the things that he does in 807, he decrees that the Jews in Baghdad must wear yellow badges. That's interesting. And the Christians wear blue ones. Okay, so in this painting, this is from 1864 by Julius Coquert. And the title of the painting is Harun al-Rashid receives the delegation sent by Charlemagne. So that's him on the left, and the Westerners, right? The Christians are the guys on the horses in the background. All the motion in this painting is really neat. The guy with the falcon, all kinds of really interesting things in there. Okay, so we know how the internet fixates on stuff. Harun sent back a large number of gifts to Charlemagne, including a very famous set of chessmen, precious stones, gold objects, all kinds of stuff. But the internet's favorite thing on that list is an elephant, right? He sent an elephant back to Europe, to Charlemagne. Nobody knows what happened to it. If it made the trip, survived, don't know. But there you go. Harun did send an elephant. Okay, and then he dies. Harun dies in 813, and his son, Abdallah al-Mamun, sends delegations to Constantinople, to the empire. And his mission is to collect evidence of, or copies of, or originals, or whatever, of anything having to do with science, scientific works by ancient Greeks, which without this is not a pillage and carry off mission. This is a delegation that he sends. You see the caliph on the left, and there's all these guys talking, and that's the emperor on the right. So some kind of game of telephone going on here. Actually, I'll give you the caption in a second. Anyway, so remember, during what people call the Dark Ages, it's the Muslims who are doing a lot of scientific and philosophical work. While the Westerners, what will become Europe, are fighting the Vikings and whatever other issues they've got going on. The Muslims do not have that kind of physical threat, and they're going to do a lot of mental work while we're just trying to stay alive. Okay. One of the books that's produced in Baghdad while Mamun is the caliph is a mathematics book called Al-Jabra. So the origins of modern algebra. Okay, so this is a picture of not a game of telephone. This is St. John the Grammarian, who's on the left, who was sent from the emperor to Mamun. And so they have this conversation about what the two leaders desire in terms of communication between the kingdoms and so on and so forth. So in England, the Kingdom of Wessex has won all of its wars recently, and it is now the dominant power in England. So remember, the places that end in X, these are West Saxons, South Saxons, East Saxons, right? These are all groups of Saxons, and their name comes from their location. So just you can guess then East Anglia is what kind of people, right? Who is living in East Anglia? You can probably figure it out. This is just southern England, by the way. So in 834 in Norway, 2 women are buried in a Viking burial ship. Okay, why do we care? This is the famous ship that was excavated, was discovered and excavated from its resting place in 1904 and 1905, which is the lower left and upper right pictures here. This is them digging the boat out. Okay, and in 2008 it was just called the Viking ship for many years. In 2008 they started calling it the Oseberg ship because that's where it was found. The city or the town that it was found is called Oseberg. One of these women was probably upper class. There's an older one as well. I'm not really sure if one was the servant of the other, why they're buried together, things like this. But this ship, this burial, is a significant source of knowledge for our understanding of Viking culture and things like that. The images, the way we imagine their ornamentation and jewelry and patterns and things like that. This is one of the early sources of our understanding of their lives. The top left this is part of the handle of a bucket, right? This seated figure. And you'll notice that the 4 red squares in the center of them, that's very obviously that's a swastika. So that is actually just a sun symbol. I think we talked about this in class. That symbol is way old. It is thousands of years old, and it just represents the sun, right? And so it's something that appears in a lot of artwork from a lot of different cultures. It's not confined to any one group. You'll find it in Indian artwork from like India, all over the world. And so there you see it right there. Very common, very popular symbol until the Nazis ruined it for everybody. Okay, so in 841, the Vikings found the city of Dublin. They don't call it that. So they're continuing to push out. They're continuing to try and find new places to live, new places to settle, and they have now come inland on the River Liffey as far as, again, what will be modern Dublin. And so you can see this is how we imagine their city was laid out. And these are just rows of long houses, right? And you can see the streets. You can see that it is in fact a city, or it will be. In 845, the Vikings have come inland on the Seine as far as Paris. They attack Paris more than once. In this particular instance, in 845, they're kind of bribed not to attack, but they come back. They come to Paris more than one time. So this painting, this etching, shows them using ladders to climb the city walls into Paris, just right off the river. I'm not sure where they had those ladders on their boats this whole time. And you can see they're rowing, right? They've got sails, but they're rowing up the river. That's a long way to row a boat. Okay, so back to Baghdad. In 850, a Muslim scholar in Baghdad named Al-Kindi is using translations of Aristotle, which we're not reading in Western Europe right now. This is not a guy we're interested in. If you recall, during the Middle and Late Patristic Age, a lot of these Greek philosophies were discouraged because people were incorrectly mixing it with Christianity. This has led to issues and heresies, understanding the nature of Christ, for example. So that kind of learning was discouraged. Well, now the Muslims are interested in it. And Al-Kindi basically creates a Neoplatonic philosophy that's supposed to go with Islam. Okay, he was trying to make Greek thought accessible and acceptable to Muslim audiences. Surprise, surprise, plenty of people and the religious aspects of Islam did not like what he was doing, thought he was doing something really bad. But he kept at it anyway, and he's an important figure. Most people haven't heard of him. He's important because he translated a lot of these texts. He didn't do a lot of too much analysis and interpretation, but he did translate all these things. So later people, especially, we're going to talk about Avicenna, later Muslim philosophers were building off of Al-Kindi's work. Okay, so he wanted to, again, so philosophy, natural theology, speculative theology, which is what we would call divine revelation, like things that are revealed, things that are mysteries otherwise, and so on and so forth. And to stay out of trouble with religious leaders, obviously he was careful to point out that, but in the end, doesn't matter. Revelation is the most important thing, because sometimes reason can't help us. So he was not, executed or anything like that. He lived a long life. Okay, so sometime in the late 850s, Christian missionaries develop an alphabet for what we would call Slavic peoples, an alphabet that today is the source for Russian, Serbian, Bulgarian, a variety of languages in northeastern Europe. So the name Cyrillic comes from St. Cyril. Cyril and Methodius were the original missionaries to the Slavs. We know they translated the scriptures. We don't really think the Cyrillic alphabet that we look at today on a piece of paper was completely developed by him, but he's certainly the origin of this translation and the efforts to put the Slavic language in a written form. Okay, so this is a Venn diagram, and so the upper left set is Greek, and the upper right set is our Arabic letters. Okay, they come from Arabia originally. And then the bottom set is Cyrillic. So you can see in the very center, obviously, quite a few letters that all three languages share. That does not mean that they make the same sounds in each language at all, but the written character, that many are that we share. Quite a few that Greek and Cyrillic share. Only one that we have and Cyrillic has that Greek does not, right? They use other letters to make that sound. Okay, this is really interesting. I thought this is my favorite find for this century, was a visual diagram of how these alphabets are related to each other. That was super interesting. All right, back to the Vikings. Okay, so in 860, the Vikings attack Constantinople. Again, this is more complicated than I will properly explain right now, but keep in mind, there are multiple groups of these Northmen, right? The Norsemen are coming from the same origin, but they're not the same groups anymore. They have split long before they started invading England on one end and Constantinople on the other. They had split into separate groups. Okay, so this group of Vikings, this group of Norsemen, are called the Rus, which means red-haired. And they're not coming from Norway, they're coming from due north of Constantinople. They're coming from across the Black Sea at what would be the modern city of Kiev in Ukraine. Okay, so they're not crossing all of Europe or coming all the way around the Mediterranean longboats or anything like that. They are the easternmost group of Vikings, of Norsemen, and their home is in, again, this would be modern Ukraine. So they're not that far. And their name for Constantinople is Tsargard. Okay, Gard means city, and Tsar is the Slavic form of Caesar. So their word for Constantinople literally is Caesar town, right? They call the leader of the empire Caesar too. So this Viking, they besiege and then destroy the city, is devastating. Not so much that the interior city was breached, but all of the extensive farmland, all the suburbs, everything around Constantinople, including on the little islands in the strait, was just obliterated. It was really bad. So again, within the city, maybe not physically destroyed, but a huge part of the population was killed, and everything outside is gone. So this is a Russian icon that shows the army of the Rus outside the city walls of Constantinople. All right. So here's your Vikings. Several different groups. This is arranged by date, so these aren't different groups. These are different time periods. So the original settlements of Vikings we're seeing in Scandinavia. It's the darkest red. And then they start spreading. So you can see there's this group, the Rus, in the upper left of the Rus states, there's a little bit of the bright red. Okay, so the little inlet, it's actually quite large, that's coming due east and ends in a little bitty point right where that bright red is. That is where St. Petersburg is today. Okay, that's the outlet to the Atlantic Ocean for modern Russia. Okay, so the original settlement of the Rus was there, not so far from the original Scandinavian settlements, okay? But they break off early, and then you can see they're going to keep spreading. All right, and the word gets around. So the Vikings are going home. They're reporting, hey, there's all kinds of land out there. Let's go. And so they begin moving to increasingly remote areas and creating settlements, not just going out and raiding. They're just moving to empty space and making it theirs. Okay, so Rurik of Scandinavia goes out to Novgorod, which is a city in, not central, but off the coast in Russia. It's inland. And he builds a city. Ta-da! Okay, so this is the Radzivilli Chronicle. It's just a page from the Radzivilli Chronicle, which is the story of the founding of Novgorod, which we'll get into later, what Novgorod was and all that stuff. Back to England. In 865, an army of Danes, that would be from Denmark, has overthrown Northumbria, Mercia, and East Anglia, and that whole area is now called the Danelaw, because the Danes' laws are the ones in effect. So you see Wales, and if you recall, Wessex is in control of extreme southern England, which is just off the map at the bottom. Okay, and then now you've got the Danelaw. It's a dangerous time to be living in England. Back to Baghdad one more time. Okay, so this is a religious movement. This is Tayfur Abu Yazid al-Bistami, who's thankfully usually just called Bayazid, has been spreading his wisdom, called Sufism. So he's kind of a cult leader. It's not really a break-off. It's a movement within Islam that is not similar to, but analogous to, the way Christians see Jesus, and just specifically meaning the Sufis think that the individual can develop a personal relationship with Allah, right? Like, oh, I, pray to Allah in the morning, help me out, Allah. I hope I have a good day. Thank you for what you gave me. The idea of chatting with the Almighty works in Sufism and does not at all work in most other sects of Islam. So they preach peace. They seem like neat, sort of friendly, pacifist people, but it's not really all sunshine and roses. Their way of achieving peace usually comes through some kind of physical mortification, and not like fasting, like ritual eye gouging, okay, and a bunch of other very, very extreme, do not Google search practices. So it sounds like a good idea. It's like, oh, well, that's good, personal relationship with God sounds right, but it's actually quite scary what they do with that. Okay, so again, this is like whiplash back and forth. 874, the Vikings settle Iceland. Okay, not Norway. Norway is part of Scandinavia. It's attached. Iceland is an island. Way up there, Arctic Circle. I've been there. It's quite cold. Okay. So they're again looking for new empty places where nobody's been. Nobody's in Iceland. Oh, fine. Well, we'll do it then. So this painting, 1877, is entitled "The Norwegians Land in Iceland," and this is by Oscar Wergeland, and it's actually in the National Museum in Reykjavik. So it's a cool painting. So they've left their longboat and they're in their little launch on their way to the coast. Iceland is very pretty, but wow, is it isolated. It's amazing. And almost there. In 899, Alfred the Great, the King of Wessex, so the King of the West Saxons, has rallied England against Viking attack. The Vikings have settled. They're here to stay in Northumbria, which is at the top of the map. And basically East Anglia is all theirs. They've taken over that. But Alfred is going to reclaim Western and Central England against the great heathen army. Okay, so Alfred is going to start turning the tide in 899. This map starts 30 years earlier. And you can see all the paths the Vikings have been taking, Alfred is going to start pushing them back from the left to the right, from the west to the east. Alfred is the main character in the Ballad of the White Horse that you'll be reading this week. Okay, so this is the map. There are other maps. There are better maps, honestly, of Alfred's life, but this is the one that goes with this century. So as you start reading the Ballad of the White Horse, this is the guy that you're going to have in mind. All right. And that's it. That's the end of that century. Questions, you know how to get a hold of me. Check out the sources and have a great day.